Today we're going to talk about political violence, which is trending here in the US. It's kind of the elephant in the room that Charlie Kirk got assassinated in front of his family, his wife and child. He was shot and killed, which is not cool to say the least. But the kind of worst thing about it for me was realizing that when it happened, it didn't really shake me that much. It was just like, oh, of course. Like this, me and my brother have talked about this since the CEO assassination. Now, propaganda by the deed is politically in the United States. And that's obviously pretty concerning that this is able to happen. But political discourse is becoming more and more factious, us versus them, right versus left. And it reminded me of a good book. It reminded me of The History of the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. And the Civil War in Corcyra. So the Civil War in Corcyra is happening in 427 BC. There's a war going on in this is the Peloponnesian War, so it's Athens versus Sparta, and there are many islands. It's almost a pseudo proxy war going on for dominance. Who's the biggest? The top chook in the amongst the Hellenes, Athens versus Sparta. And Corcyra is an island with multiple cities, and they are an oligarchy, I believe. That's their government system. So the lower class is more or less oppressed by the oligarchs, the higher aristocracy, and they're kind of bent out of shape about this. And now they have the Spartans wanting to gain their favor and take them as allies on their side. And then the oligarchs like the Spartans, and the Athenians like the more democratic minded people, which would be the lower class. So it's kind of a war being stimulated over this bigger war that's going on. And both sides are sort of taking advantage of the political rivalry already going on in Corcyra. And it all gets kicked off with an act of violence where many citizens are killed through a political act of violence. So we're going to jump into the middle here, because what Thucydides has to say about this, I think, is pertinent to what's going on right now. And I'm going to try not to say too much about politics. I don't like to talk too much about politics, especially because I don't feel who wants to listen to a young kid put his really important opinion about big, important political things. Nobody, and you shouldn't. But that's why I'm gonna tell you about this guy. So let's see. So revolutions broke out in city after city, and in places where the revolutions occurred late, the knowledge of what had happened previously in other places caused still new extravagances of revolutionary zeal, expressed by an elaboration in the methods of seizing power and by unheard of atrocities and revenge. To fit in with the change of events, words too had to change their usual meanings. What used to be described as a thoughtless act of aggression was now regarded as the courage one would expect to find in a party member. To think of the future and wait was merely another way of saying one was a coward. Any idea of moderation was just an attempt to disguise one's unmanly character. Ability to understand a question from all sides meant that one was totally unfitted for action. Fanatical enthusiasm was the mark of a real man, and to plot against an enemy behind his back was perfectly legitimate self-defense. Anybody who held violent opinions could always be trusted, and anyone who objected to them became a suspect. Kind of sounds like that Hassan Piker fella. To plot successfully was a sign of intelligence, but it was still cleverer to see that a plot was hatching. If one attempted to provide against having to do either, one was disrupting the unity of the party and acting out of fear of the opposition. In short, it was equally praiseworthy to get one's blow in first against someone who was going to do wrong, and to denounce someone who had no intention of doing any wrong at all. Family relations were a weaker tie than party membership, since party members were more ready to go to any extreme for any reason whatever. These parties were not formed to enjoy the benefits of the established laws, but to acquire power by overthrowing the existing regime. And the members of these parties felt confidence in each other not because of any fellowship in a religious communion, but because they were partners in crime. If an opponent made a reasonable speech, the party in power, so far from giving it a generous reception, took every precaution to see that it had no practical effect. Revenge was more important than self-preservation, and if pacts of mutual security were made, they were entered into by the two parties only in order to meet some temporary difficulty, and remained in force only so long as there was no other weapon available. When the chance came, the one who first seized it, boldly catching his enemy off guard, enjoyed a revenge that was all the sweeter from having been taken not openly, but because of a breach of faith. It was safer that way. It was considered. And at the same time, a victory won by treachery gave one a title for superior intelligence. And indeed, most people are more ready to call villainy cleverness than simple-minded honesty. They are proud of the first quality and ashamed of the second. Love of power, operating through greed and through personal ambition, was the cause of all these evils. To this must be added the violent fanaticism which came into play once the struggle had broken out. Leaders of parties in the cities had no programs which appeared admirable. On one side, political equality for the masses, on the other, the safe and sound government of the aristocracy. So equality versus the guys who are really powerful ruling. Democracy versus aristocracy. But in professing to serve the public interest, they were seeking to win the prizes for themselves. Okay, so in their struggle for ascendancy, nothing was barred. Terrible indeed were the actions to which they committed themselves, and in taking revenge, they went farther still. Here they were deterred neither by the claims of justice nor by the interests of the state. Their one standard was the pleasure of their own party at that particular moment, and so either by means of condemning their enemies on an illegal vote or by violently usurping power over them, they were always ready to satisfy the hatreds of the hour. Thus neither side had any use for conscientious motives. More interest was shown in those who could produce attractive arguments to justify some disgraceful action. Let me just read that again. Thus neither side had any use for Thus neither side had any use for conscientious motives. Conscientious motives. I can't read. I'm sorry, I'm retarded. For conscientious motives, more interest was shown in those who could produce attractive arguments to justify some disgraceful action. As for the citizens who held moderate views, they were destroyed by both the extreme parties, either for not taking part in the struggle or in envy at the possibility that they might survive. As a result of these revolutions, there was a general deterioration of character throughout the Greek world. The simple way of looking at things, which is so much the mark of a noble nature, was regarded as a ridiculous quality and soon ceased to exist. Society had become, simple goodwill for other people, that's retarded. It's us versus them. Society had become divided into two ideologically hostile camps, and each side viewed the other with suspicion. As for ending this state of affairs, no guarantee could be given that would be trusted, no oath sworn that people would fear to break. Everyone had come to the conclusion that it was hopeless to expect a permanent settlement, and so, instead of being able to feel confident in others, they devoted their energies to providing against being injured themselves. As a rule, those who were least remarkable for intelligence showed the greater powers of survival. Such people recognize their own deficiencies in the superior intelligence of their opponents. Fearing that they might lose a debate or find themselves outmaneuvered and intrigued by their quick-witted enemies, they boldly launch straight into action. In other words, I'm too stupid to argue with. Here's a gun. Boom! That's pretty nuts, but I mean, it's kind of scary, actually. It's really scary. Yeah, I'm too stupid to make anything constructive, to make anything happen for any productive means. What's a lot easier is taking a hammer and destroying everything, lighting a match. You know, all I needed was a match and gasoline and a couple of bullets. While their opponents, overconfident in the belief that they would see what was happening in advance and not thinking it necessary to seize by force what they could secure by policy, were the more easily destroyed because they were off their guard. I've heard this rhetoric before where it's like, if you rely on trying to save things in a political safe way, you're going to lose out, because the force of violence is the ultimate strategy. So we need to buy guns, stock up ammo, and move to Idaho. And start killing people. Okay, I'm talking too much, because I think by the way, I think that's a retarded idea and totally against what I'm saying here, but it just reminds me of that. It's like, yeah, what we need to do is load up on guns and get ready to kill. That's the political action. It's kind of scary because it's sounding a whole lot like this, and that this seems like this is sort of the climate that we're in. And when people start getting this idea pretty seriously, that as a rule, those who are least remarkable for intelligence show the greater power of survival. Such people recognize their own deficiencies in the superior intelligence of the opponents. Fearing that they might lose a debate or find themselves outmaneuvered and intrigued by their quick-witted enemies, they boldly launch straight into action. Okay, the more and more that gets in people's stupid heads, the quicker we're going to be in Corcyra. Certainly, it was in Corcyra that there occurred the first examples of the breakdown of law and order. There was the revenge taken in their hour of triumph by those who had in the past been arrogantly oppressed instead of wisely governed. There were the wicked resolutions taken by those who, particularly under the pressure of misfortune, wished to escape from their usual poverty and coveted the property of their neighbors. There were the savage and pitiless actions in which men were carried not so much for the sake of gain as because they were swept away into I'm sorry, I'm bad at pronouncing words. Internecine. That's probably not how you say that. They were swept away into an internecine struggle by their ungovernable passions. Excuse my poor, my lack of pronunciation skills. You know, I'm part of the class that's too stupid to outmaneuver the opponent, so that's why I'm gonna stop talking. Then, with the ordinary conventions of civilized life thrown into confusion, human nature, pay attention. Human nature, always ready to offend even where laws exist, showed itself proudly in its true colors, as something incapable of controlling passion, insubordinate to the idea of justice, the enemy to anything superior to itself. For if it had not been for the pernicious power of envy, men would not so have exalted vengeance above innocence and profit above justice. Wow. Indeed, it is true that in these acts of revenge on others, men take it upon themselves to begin the process of repealing those general laws of humanity which are there to give a hope of salvation to all who are in distress, instead of leaving those laws in existence, remembering that there may come a time when they too will be in danger and will need their protection. It's pretty heavy. I want to reread that paragraph because that's pretty important. Then, with the ordinary conventions of civilized life thrown into confusion, human nature, always ready to offend, even where where laws exist, showed itself proudly in its true colors, as something incapable of controlling passion, insubordinate to the idea of justice, the enemy to anything superior to itself. For if it had not been for the pernicious power of envy, men would not so have exalted vengeance above innocence and profit above justice. Indeed, it is true that in these acts of revenge on others, men take it upon themselves to begin the process of repealing those general laws of humanity which are to give a hope of salvation to all who are in distress, instead of leaving those laws in existence, remembering that there may come a time when they too will be in danger and will need their protection. So you get rid of the social contract, or you get rid of laws to govern human nature, and we start becoming okay with violence and theft and all these things for our party, because that's what's in our interest. It's okay that people assassinate somebody else because, well, we disagreed with the person that got assassinated. So that's actually a really good thing that happened. When we start doing that, we're getting closer and closer to the Hobbesian state of nature, or the war of all against all. So this is kind of seems like a gloom and doom type of video, but it reminds me of the war in Corcyra. And I know there's been a lot of kind of talks about civil war. I'm very hesitant to say that is even remotely close, but it seems like that's becoming more and more present in the psyche of Americans, and it's clearly not a good thing. I'm not trying to keep this anxiety going, but I think it's a good thing to remind yourself of what this kind of thing looks like, especially in these times, words changing their meanings. That's a pretty big deal, and I think words do change their meanings, and they have changed their meanings. We flippantly do this nowadays. To fit in with the change of events, words too had to change their usual meanings. What used to be described as a thoughtless act of aggression was now regarded as the courage one would expect to find in a party member. Healthcare in the United States sucks. Therefore, what that one guy, Luigi Manchin, did was actually a really good thing. That's what needed to happen. He's a good man for that. He shouldn't be charged. Just something to think about. Yeah, I think that's it.